Well, good morning once again, and thank you for joining us for our Policy Outlook panel. And big thank you to Chuck Grassley again. How about give Chuck Grassley a hand for his leadership? So I'm Grant Menke. I currently serve as the Policy Director for Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. And I've been assured that I can keep this job unless Monty decides to fire me at the conclusion of this panel. So that's really encouraging, but I'm looking forward to it. So joining me today is Doug Whitehead, Chief Operating Officer of the National Biodiesel Board. Doug is in charge of implementing NBB's strategic plan, and he also spent the last half of 2017 managing NBB's government affairs in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Grant.
Next, to my right, we have Kathy Bergren, and she's the Director of Public Policy for the National Corn Growers Association. Prior to NCGA, Kathy spent 13 years on Capitol Hill working on ag and other important issues, but her most important resume point is that she has Iowa roots, raised on her grandparents' family farm in northern Iowa. So welcome, Kathy. We're also joined by Sarah Caswell on the far left, Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Edeniq, who's one of the leading technology providers for corn kernel fiber cellulosic ethanol technology. And prior to Edeniq, Sarah spent time on Capitol Hill and as the Director of Biofuels and Biomass Policy at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. So welcome, Sarah. And finally, we're joined once again by Growth Energy CEO Emily Skor. Thank you so much for being here, Emily. And a big thank you to all of you for participating in this panel to talk policy at I think what we can all agree is a very interesting time in policy making. I think we can all agree also that 2017 was a very memorable year, complete with a lot of milestones, a lot to be proud of for the biofuels community, certainly some challenges as well. But 2017 was also a milestone year for my wife Susie's family farm, as they received a Heritage Farm Award at the Iowa State Fair for 150 years of continuous family ownership and operation of their family farm. You can see the picture up there on the screen. Long story short, as we're all waiting there to receive the award by the stage, Susie's dad turns, and he was rather nostalgic about the situation, and he says to me, can you believe my great-grandpa spent less on the first 40 acres of his family farm than we spent on those matching t-shirts? He then explained to me that Susie's, my wife Susie's great-great-grandpa had spent $50 on their farm's first 40 acres in 1867, and the family had spent over $200 on 20 or so matching t-shirts for the award. So that ceremony really made me think of how far we've come in rural America. And what if Susie's great-great-grandpa could be here today to see the farm that he founded and grew up on, to see how far we've come in agriculture, and to see the role that the biofuels industry has played in revolutionizing agriculture and creating opportunities for the next generation of farmers in rural America. And so I think he'd be pretty amazed, and I think he'd be pretty proud. So I tell you what, I'm sure proud of this industry, and it's great to be surrounded by a quartet of policy experts who all share the same pride in the progress of biofuels and modern agriculture. So, speaking of pride, I want to reflect on a pretty remarkable policy milestone that the biofuels industry experienced late last year, the 10-year anniversary of the expanded RFS, which was signed into law on December 19th, 2007. And my first question for you all is, as you look back on the first 10 years of RFS 2, what are you most proud of? Emily, you're all warmed up. Would you care to get us started?
Yes. And so I wasn't with this.
Monty, while we're going through some technical difficulties, Grant, if that's all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I think.
we good?
Can you hear me now? No.
I don't think so. Doug, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you, Grant, and it is a pleasure to be here on behalf of the National Biodiesel Board. I'm very thankful for the invitation to be up here. and 10 years with the RFS. What am I proud of? Over the past 6 months, I've been very proud to tell the story of innovation and stewardship that the ag community started in central United States started. You know, the fact that 10 years ago we were, round numbers, less than 300 million gallons in the marketplace for biodiesel, and this year, if you include renewable diesel and imports, of course, we're around 3 billion gallons. So that roughly adds up to about 64,000 jobs, and jobs in hard-to-find rural America. So how we've all come together through a few challenges. This RFS has worked. When we have an administration and an EPA administrator that wants to follow the intent of the law, it's been a fantastic program for growth.
Great. Am I? Yeah, I'm good. Okay, thank you. I think when corn growers look at the RFS over the past 10 years, I think one of the things that corn growers can most be proud of is the increased productivity that corn farmers have had over the past 10 years, meeting the challenges of a new market and showing the world that corn growers are able to produce not only feed, not only food, but also fuel on an increasingly productive scale and an increasingly sustainable manner. I think when the RFS was expanded in 2007, there were more than 93 million acres planted to corn. In 2017, there were 90 million acres planted to corn in the United States, and at the same time in that year, ethanol production was the highest ever. So I think that really, from the farmer's perspective, really speaks to the productivity increases that we've seen that have enabled us to meet this growing demand. And you know, not by putting more land into production, not by other means, but really just that increased productivity.
Thank you.
I'll tell you what I'm proud of. The RFS is working, and it is working beautifully. We are blending more biofuels every single year, and we've shattered this notion of a blend wall. What blend wall? Consumers are using gasoline that's blended with more than 10% in their fuel right now. And what's been really fun for me in the last year is I've had the opportunity to go visit some ethanol plants that are celebrating their 10-year anniversaries. And it has been a wonderful way for me to kind of relive what was going through the minds and the hearts of a lot of small communities 10 years ago when people were investing and they were taking a leap of faith. And to hear their stories of who was around at the plant when they first broke ground, and the ebb and the flow and the ups and the downs of the economics and the uncertainty over the years, and to hear the story of the perseverance and where we are today, it's truly magnificent.
Thank you. Sarah.
And following up on that, I mean, to the success of the RFS, 10 years ago we didn't have a cellulosic industry, and today we have a commercial cellulosic industry. I think that's a real success, and it's a real measure of success of the policy that was designed to drive innovation, investment, and the greater production and use of biofuels in our U.S. transportation fuel supply. And Congress gave us the directive, and the industry has responded.
Well, thank you very much. So sticking with the RFS, in the last week or so, discussion has really been picking up on potential congressional action on the RFS. In fact, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt was testifying at an oversight hearing of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee today. He might even be still up there right now. But we know that Senator John Cornyn, Representative John Shimkus of Illinois, and Representative Bill Flores of Texas, Cornyn's also from Texas, so a whole lot of Texas if you're keeping score at home, are working on an RFS reform bill. So my question to the group is, how serious of a threat does the Cornyn-Shimkus-Flores effort represent? And do you expect any serious movement on RFS reform legislation in 2018?
Well, I think we're facing a wide variety of threats. What I've seen amongst the biofuels industry, amongst the people that are in this room and on this stage is, you give us a challenge and we're up to it. We want to work within a terrific program that works. We know this conversation is hard, and this conversation was hard 10 years ago when this legislation was passed. So we stand ready, prepared to talk about this program. If there are good ideas, we want to explore them. If there are bad ideas, we want to beat them back, which we have. So we look forward to having additional conversations with members on the Hill. We need your help. We look forward to talking with the EPA, assuring that until something changes, that they're not doing things in the middle of the night, that they're doing things in the light of day through rulemaking.
And that they're pursuing policies and ideas that the industry is putting forward that are really constructive, I think. I think that's very important this year, but I'll let you.
What's important to remember is we don't sell fuel in an open marketplace. I certainly wish we did, and I know you all do as well. And so we very much need the RFS to kind of right that ship and to give us a chance to compete, to give us access to that consumer. So any conversation around reform moving forward has got to begin with our ability to see our growth path in that conversation. And to this point, I've been part of the conversations. I participated in roundtables, as did many other members of our industry last year with Mr. Shimkus and Mr. Flores. And so happy to have the conversation. But if you come to the table beginning with an idea that immediately cuts or caps our ability to grow, that's a tough conversation to have. And I think that's the challenge that's taking place right now. You have a lot of disparate voices, and I do know that those members of Congress and others do want to move something forward. We'll likely introduce a bill this year. It's going to be tough to see where this goes, particularly on an issue that divides the Republican caucus as we're heading into an election year.
Yeah, Grant, I think I'd agree with that. I mean, we look at the RFS. I think we can all say this is a policy that has worked, that has been successful. If there are, members of Congress who, think that, well, we need to change this, we need, start with a conversation about this has worked and it has worked well. We know that these, proposals are out there, that there continue to be discussions. I think one thing is, there's been a lot of division on the oil and gas and refining side over what's the problem and what's the solution. So I think it also remains to be seen, is there unity on that side of the equation? Because I think there is a lot of unity on the biofuels side of the equation, that the RFS is working, and that it's been good policy. And I think Emily alluded to some of the political realities also. When you have a lot of other divisive issues on the table in Congress, whether that is immigration, the budget, and other things like that continue to be under debate and discussion, is how much appetite is there to add another very complex issue to that table also in an election year. So there's a lot of different factors involved. I know it's hard to give Grant an easy answer to his question, but there are a lot of considerations.
No, those are very good points. So moving from the legislative to the regulatory front on the RFS, we just got through an RFS rulemaking process last year, and we're a few months away from starting a new one. Last year's final RFS rule obviously maintained the 15 billion gallon conventional biofuel target. However, the biomass-based diesel and cellulosic targets fell short, with biodiesel being flatlined and cellulosic being cut year over year, and based on some fairly specious methodology. So, Sarah, looking ahead to this rule, how confident are you that we can convince EPA to abandon some of its sketchy methodology and restore growth to the RFS?
Well, I think there's a couple of points. To Kathy's point, the industry has never been more united to protect and to grow the RFS. And given all that happened last year during the RVO setting, we as an industry recognize how important it is to meet with EPA early and often, to talk to them about the success of all aspects of our industry, including the cellulosic piece. Edeniq, where I work, is a cellulosic biotechnology company who has 6 registered plant customers with the EPA to generate D3 RINs. We're one part of the growing corn fiber cellulosic industry. And so we are focused on having a united message to Mr. Pruitt and his staff that setting the RVOs for 2019 and getting them right for cellulosic in particular is extraordinarily important to promote the investment in production of cellulosic and the growth of the industry. We are making we're making the points that there is this momentum that we've seen, particularly over the last year, when more and more of these registrations have come online and the production capability has come online, that the 2019 cellulosic RVO must be done using methodology that takes into account this momentum and this forward-looking momentum, and so that the number that they come up with for a final 2019 cellulosic RVO does represent actual expected production for next year.
That's great. Doug, how does NBB plan on working with the administration this year on the volume obligation process?
Well, when you ask me that question directly, my heart rate goes up a little bit. We're all talking about it and thinking about it because, unfortunately, we've seen some data, we've seen some attitudes that come down from Administrator Pruitt that he does not like the IRFA. He's the last rulemaking for biodiesel, the NODA, is very disappointing. To backtrack a little bit, while I'm sitting here in Iowa, I must thank the champions in Iowa for really going above and beyond to thwart the ill-advised NODA. And I don't want to go back and talk about that anymore unless you want to, and I can talk about it all day. But where we go from here is, thankfully, again, to Iowa, when President Trump was here campaigning and he said he would support the RFS. We all know that he also made promises to the refiners, and it's up to us to bridge that gap. So I'm very thankful to the President for his support. I'm thankful to the President for his tax reform, for his leadership. If you're not a Donald Trump supporter, then you need to be a supporter of the United States and that presidency. I'm very thankful for him. We have that audience that we have to talk to because this EPA does not want to help us. When in fact, had they just bumped the biomass-based diesel pool by 100 million gallons, 200 million gallons, we would have knocked that out easily and been thanking them. And then plans that were rolled up in tubes would have come out and expansions would have happened. Over the last 6 months, I've learned a lot about rumors in D.C. I've learned a lot about signals in D.C. And so this rulemaking is a tremendous signal to our industry, to all of us, the biofuels industry. If you support us, if you support reducing our dependence on foreign oil, creating jobs in rural America, biofuels, then support the RVO rulemaking process in the light of day, follow the intent of the law, and make those RVOs higher. So how are we doing that? We're trying to talk to the administration. We're trying to hold the President to his promises and tell him why he should and what benefit that means for him. Of course, we want to talk to the EPA as often as they'll talk to us. I think there's some opportunities that we bring in some diverse groups and tell our story together. I know from our perspective, there's a disconnect between capacity and production. How does the trade case victory for us impact that? How does the lack of the tax credit impact that? I could tell you, every time the RVO has been set, the biodiesel industry has blown through it. So set it higher and we'll get to work.
That's great.
You know, I would add, I think Sarah is right. If you look at the conversation around the RVOs this summer, it's going to be really more on the advanced side than on the first generation or corn ethanol. I mean, 2 years in a row at 15 billion gallons, you would be hard pressed to come out with a 2019 RVO that was not at 15 billion gallons. And keep in mind, there is still growth for us in that 15. I mean, last year we were at about 14.3 billion gallons used domestically. So there's still 700 million gallons of growth for us within that 15 billion. The conversation's going to be on the advanced, and with respect to the methodology, it comes down to EPA. If you want to know what we will produce next year, don't look at last year's number. And that's what's happening. They're saying, how much did you produce last year? Okay, well, we'll set that at the target or maybe even a little bit lower. Cellulosic, there's a tremendous amount of growth and innovation. We're going to continue to see step changes. We have the commercial capabilities. So as has been said on the panel, it's got to be a forward-looking rule that comes out. And what businesses need, especially on the innovation side more than anything, is certainty. Businesses crave certainty. And the most important thing that this EPA can do year after year with the rule is show the intent that we want to blend more every year consistent with the RFS. We're going to get targets, give you targets that encourage that. They don't have to be wildly outrageous, but give us something to reach for, and we will be able to hit that.
Nice. Anything to add, Kathy?
No, I mean, I think Emily, makes a good point. We did see last year on the conventional, the conventional biofuels, the implied, 15 billion gallons. That was very successful. Certainly, it hasn't been that way in the past. But the court decision last year was very helpful in really kind of cementing in, what EPA can and cannot consider when they're setting those volumes. So I think that's very important for corn and ethanol to have that. As we look forward, I think from NCGA's perspective, I think we do want to see some additional expansion on the cellulosic side. As those cellulosic producers are generating, gallons that are D3 RINs, that frees up some additional space for conventional ethanol production. So I think that does help grow demand for corn, in different segments of the industry. So that's important. To look back a little bit, I think Doug hit on an important point. What last fall with some of the additional waivers and other reductions and authorities that EPA was exploring to use, that was very concerning. Across the industry, that would have been a pretty significant step backward. And credit certainly goes to champions of biofuels in the Senate for working with EPA and for to helping EPA to not go down that path. That was certainly beneficial, and hopefully we can build on that going into the next year.
Well, thank you.
And one thing to add to
Yes.
that, just one of the points that we're making as an industry to the administration and to the EPA, kind of piggybacking on what Kathy was saying, is that increasing the cellulosic RVOs and helping to facilitate the momentum in the corn fiber cellulosic space in particular helps the corn industry because it can add immediate help to the margins, in the agriculture world that we are now living in with an oversupply of corn and corn prices where they are. So, the administration should want to help continue the momentum of the corn fiber cellulosic space in the RVOs.
So I heard tax and trade mentioned over here. We're going to get to those topics. One additional regulatory topic I want to address is the topic of E15 reed vapor pressure parity. And if you're out at the IRFA booth, you can sign your name to a letter to Administrator Scott Pruitt urging him to immediately grant a RVP waiver for E15 to allow year-round sales of E15. And obviously there was a lot of efforts on both the regulatory and the legislative front in 2017. while those efforts did not ultimately cross the goal line, we did get a commitment from Administrator Pruitt to 7 Midwestern senators that he would issue a definitive ruling on the agency's authority to issue that nationwide RVP waiver for E15. So, Emily, where are we at on the EPA announcement on RVP parity, and what do you think their answer will be?
Well, let me start with why this is so important for every individual in this room. I talked about that 700 million growth opportunity in the conventional biofuel space. We have saturated E10. There is no growth in E10. Our ability to sell more biofuel in this country means it must be sold in the form of a higher blend, E15 and higher. And the biggest hurdle for market adoption of E15 right now is this Reid vapor pressure, which essentially treats E15 different from any other fuel. You can't sell it in summer months unless to a flex fuel vehicle, which is only 1 out of 10 cars on the road. And as I talked about in my remarks, I've spent a lot of time with the retailers who are selling E15 right now, and what they have said, they are united in a chorus. Their biggest concern right now is RVP. You get me RVP, and I will sell more. I will put more E15 in more stations. I will include it in every build-out. You've also got retailers on the sidelines who are waiting to see what happens with RVP. So I do believe, and have been told across the board, we get that fixed. That's going to give us a step change in terms of our growth domestically. Last year, I've spent a lot of time also with the lawyers. What's the best way to get RVP? And to get it cleanly and absolutely. Now, the clean, absolute way to get it is with a congressional fix. Congress changes the law. We never talk about it again. We never revisit it. And there was a big push last summer. And while we won the debate, and people weren't really challenging us on the merits of RVP, it did get caught up in politics. And right now, I think EPA is really the most likely place where we're going to see some action. Mr. Pruitt has pledged that he's going to figure this one out. We've had conversations with EPA, and I know that his team is well aware, all right, we got to roll up our sleeves and figure out, can we do this? What's the pathway? And from my perspective, what is the pathway that EPA grants this waiver that puts us in the least vulnerable position? Because what I don't want is our fate determined in the courts as opposed to by the regulatory authorities. So I believe, Sarah was telling me that Mr. Pruitt made a comment earlier today. I was on stage, so I didn't see that news clip. That hopefully in short term he'll come out. And it's either, yes, EPA has the ability legally to grant this, here's what that would be, or no, we don't. We do believe Congress is the body that has to solve this, in which case the football is kicked back to Congress.
Thank you. Anything to add there?
No, I think that sums it up really well. I think when we looked at I think Emily said when they were having a lot of debates on this last summer in the Senate, in the Senate committee, when people really did look at the merits of this issue, politics and extraneous issues aside, it really makes sense. There's a barrier here that doesn't make regulatory sense. That was something that was put in regulations before there was even, E15. So it really, it's logical that this needs to be updated. This needs to, reflect the current availability on fuel. And when we look at it, it's better on the environmental side. There's benefits. So there's a lot of, really sound reasons, to do this. But there obviously we all know the politics and other issues get pulled into it. So continuing to work on the best way to move that forward, and it's something that we're all working on together, which I think sends a good message to to EPA and to others that we're all working on this together and trying to find the best way forward.
And I'll add one thing that I've really enjoyed in talking with our elected officials in Washington about RVP. This gives us a chance to go in to a lawmaker and have a conversation about ethanol that isn't about the RFS. And so many people have heard the RFS conversation over and over and over again, but you can go into someone from West Virginia or California or New York State, and you can talk about the value of consumer choice, and biofuels, higher blends that bring down the price of gasoline. And it's a totally different conversation. So it's been a good opportunity for us to really broaden the base of understanding and support for biofuels on some level.
No, great points. I mean, when you see the momentum we've seen on E15 over the last year and being up to 1,300 stations, 29 states, 3 billion miles driven with no issues whatsoever, you grant that RVP waiver, we could really open the floodgates. How exciting would that be? Moving on to tax policy. So there was a fairly significant piece of tax legislation, federal tax reform passed signed by President Trump on December 22nd. That bill included a whole lot of things, but one of the things it did not include was an extenders package or a reinstatement of the biodiesel tax incentive or the cellulosic biofuel incentive, both of which have been lapsed since the end of 2016. Doug, what's the latest on congressional action on an extenders package, and what's the biodiesel industry doing to get the reinstatement over the finish line?
Great question. It's a lot to unpack. I thought this was going to be done December 8th. Mm-hmm. Wasn't that the first deadline?
That was the first one.
So going back to what I like to talk about, the fundamentals of lobbying on this side, we needed a revenue-generating bill that originated in the House. We need support from Senate Finance. We need 10 or so Democrats. We need champions. And, you know, the word champion gets thrown around a lot. Let me tell you, we have some fantastic champions in Iowa. Oh, my goodness. We could not have done this on trade, tax, or anything on our RFS without the champions. So we need some attention on this because we have a lot of attention on DACA, on the wall, discretionary spending, budget caps, all those things that are very important that we don't typically lobby for, but they have to be done. And so we know that Senator Grassley was unable to, because of the mood and attitude in both bodies, to get our extender in tax reform. And that's okay, because what a champion does is he finds another path. And he talked to Leader McConnell, he talked to Chairman Hatch, he talked to Chairman Brady and Speaker Ryan, and told them about the merits of this biodiesel tax incentive. And I think they saw the merits, but I also think they felt the wrath of the senator. And so we were given some promises. So then we were asked to shore up some support on the House side. So I did see Congressman David Young's father in the hall earlier, and I was very proud to shake his hand and thank him for having such a great son in David, who took the challenge of us and said, we need some backstop in the House. So David, in a very coordinated way, went out and got 43 members of Congress to support our biodiesel tax credit through the extenders package as a backstop for whenever somebody in the House said there's no need for this, there's no interest for this, we could say, here's this letter. So we're waiting. We thought that December 8th there was going to be an omnibus funding bill. Now there's a clean CR and we weren't on it. So it goes to December 22nd. No, there's a clean CR and we're not on it. I assure you it's going to happen January 19th. And I believe them. There was no disingenuous or no malicious intent there. There was just some really big things that hadn't been accomplished or negotiated. But we still had, what you need is a promise from champions. It's still there. So there's been some disruptions in tax reform. Anytime you pass a great big piece of legislation for the first time in 31 plus years, you're going to miss a comma, a shall is going to be a must, a decimal point may be wrong, and there'll be some technical corrections. We all know some of those. So we're really looking for something that's non-controversial, must pass, that we could put the tax credit, the extenders, all the extenders on, and a date change, non-controversial. You open it up, then you open yourself up for maybe some potential problems. So that's where we are. We all know that February 8th is the next deadline. We were hoping for omnibus. I don't think that's going to happen, but earlier I mentioned rumors. So this afternoon I may hear another story. There may not be enough time to get, say they got omnibus decided, all these big things done by the 8th, they're still going to have to get to staff, the people that do the work, and dot some I's, cross some T's, check for errors, and then probably pushes to the 16th. Say we can't negotiate those things for an omnibus, and we go back to another continuing resolution. I think the mood has become uneasy. Anytime these extenders have been reinstated, they've been done in January. I don't think there's a problem getting it done in March, but we also talked earlier about signals, and the later this goes, the harder it is for you, investors, or manufacturers of fuel, to make those plans that are going to impact this year's RVO and next year's RVO, so we could tell that story again. So we really need to get this done now. So today in Washington, D.C., we have 11 meetings, members of the Senate. They're our friends. It's not a re-education meeting. It's not a here's my packet meeting. It's an eyeball-to-eyeball, serious discussion about urgency in getting this done. So we're all very thankful for our champions. We're very thankful to be still in the conversation and for that conversation to be had more often now. We just hope that they can negotiate in good faith on these big ticket things that are good for our country as well. Get that behind us so we can get on to extenders. And I'm sorry I took that much time, but that's
good stuff,
I think
Doug.
that's where we are.
Sarah, how about on the cellulosic side of things?
I mean, we would be a part of the extender package, so I don't have too much to add in terms of process, but we're hopeful that it will be included in a must-pass bill here shortly.
Yeah. Well, great. So there was a point about a technical correction that you raised, and that got me thinking about another interesting provision that had a lot of people in agriculture and our industry talking and scratching their heads. The infamous Section 199A co-op patronage dividend provision. Without going into too much detail, because most of you know exactly what I'm talking about, the final tax reform bill included a provision meant to preserve benefits in Section 199A for cooperatives and their patrons, but actually appeared to have the unintended consequence of disadvantaging independent operators in the same industry. So a lot of interest in that. Kathy, would you just give us an update on where that issue is at?
Sure, I can do that. I don't think we have probably the definitive answers that people are looking for, but I think there continue to be discussions with the Senate offices that worked on this language with companies and co-ops on both sides about what could be the solution here to to making sure that these unintended consequences are not carried forward. But at this point, I don't think we have an exact resolution. But I think those discussions continue. So I think that's important, and sort of looking at how would something when is agreed to, how would it sort of move procedurally. But I think folks could just know that there is work, some work underway to address this, and there's a lot of folks that recognize that this is something that's going to need another look.
I would add that the senators who were responsible for the 199A language were quite pretty immediately thereafter said that's not what we intended to happen. We didn't want to create this type of market impact. So they've been very clear from the outset, we want to change this. We're all part of the conversation and the dialogue. What will that change be? Their goal is just kind of parity across the board. And as Kathy said, it's the time frame that we don't know. What is the time frame for action that we're trying to figure out?
All right. Well, 2017, clearly a big year for taxes. Also a lot happening on the trade front as well. So just jumping right into it, Doug, where are we at on the trade cases dealing with imported biodiesel from Argentina and Indonesia, and what are the next steps?
Thanks, Grant. Many of you in the room have been part of the conversation with us over the past nearly 4 years. You know, we've always had a standing trade committee, but we've really been researching biodiesel that's come to the United States, subsidized, legally dumped, that is hurting you. It's hurting our industry. So it was not for the faint of heart. It was not inexpensive. We did a lot of research. We had a lot of NDAs signed so that we can get into the books and profitability and all that. And we took our shot. And so we had anti-dumping and CVD cases, 2 each against Indonesia and Argentina, 4 cases. Once again, I'll talk about champions again. I think I may have mentioned earlier, but we had to go in front of the ITC. We had U.S. Senator Heitkamp and McCaskill and Grassley all submit testimony, told our story. It's a good story. So really it was about leveling the playing field. It wasn't about eliminating imports. That was never our goal. We just didn't want to get beat as soon as it landed over here. We'll compete. I know every one of you, well, I know a lot of you in here. And you want to compete, and you will. And so this should help us with 300 to 400 million gallons of biomass-based diesel. So that's a pretty good signal, and we should get to work on that. And so now we go through this whole process of the research and then execution and victory. Now we're in maintenance mode, so we have to pay attention to what's happening in these countries and what appeals may happen, or just we'll be in defense mode of this now. But thank everybody for their efforts in this regard, and where we've watched what fuel's coming in from Indonesia and Argentina over the past several months, and it's gone to zero. We know that it's finding its way in through different paths, but this is a positive signal for our industry, Grant.
No, appreciate that. So continuing with trade, NAFTA was back in the news again last week as officials from the U.S., Mexico, and Canada met in Montreal for their second to last round of scheduled negotiations on NAFTA. And so, Kathy, what steps is NCGA taking to protect NAFTA right now?
No, thank you. You brought up an issue that has taken a lot of NCGA and farmers' attention in the past year. Really, the importance of NAFTA to not only corn growers but to U.S. agriculture overall. We look at 25% of corn exports in some form or fashion are going to Canada and Mexico. Canada is one of the top export destinations for ethanol, but it's not just corn. Mexico is also a top market for beef, for soybean meal. So this really gets at agriculture very broadly, the benefits that we have with Canada and Mexico. So I think through NCGA, working with state corn associations, with farmers, all the way through our organizations have really looked at how can farmers convey to the administration, to whether it's the trade officials to President Trump. This is the importance of NAFTA for agriculture and for me individually as a farmer. This is what it means to me. So I think we've really tried to work to send that message, and at the same time send a similar message to farmers' elected representatives, and they have stood up and sent the same message back to the administration. Here's what NAFTA means to the farmers that I represent. So I think that has been positive. As we the negotiations are ongoing. Things do seem to shift week to week, day to day sometimes, but I think we have made progress in really expressing and broadening the understanding of the importance of NAFTA to agriculture and the, what that economic impact is. And so that's been helpful in this process. And it, because farmers and others have really taken the time to help spread that message, to help tell their story on trade. Trade can be a big broad topic, but when you boil it down to an individual saying that this is how this impacts me, it's very meaningful.
Appreciate that. Two other markets with tremendous potential that have been impacted by protectionist trade policies are Brazil and China. And I was wondering, Emily, if you could talk about what you see on the horizon for the Chinese and Brazilian markets for U.S. ethanol in 2018.
Absolutely. Our three biggest trading partners are China, Brazil, and Canada. And two of our three biggest trading partners have put up barriers, protectionist barriers that prevent our ability to have a free trade arrangement. And that, I'm talking about China and Brazil. Now, I will say in China, we could not ask for a better ambassador to China than Ambassador Branstad. So know that we are served well by him in that position. With China, on the one hand, very exciting news that the country has announced its desire to move to E10 by 2020. That would be a tremendous volume of biofuels, and I think it would be an opportunity for their own rural economy and potentially for ours as well. And, the reality is we are producing the cheapest octane on the planet. And so what's happening is because the value is so good, you've got these countries who are saying, wait a minute, I've got to protect my domestic producers. And so China put in, at the beginning of 2017, barriers that basically eviscerated that marketplace for us from an ethanol perspective. Now, at the end of last year, they did announce they're going to take away the VAT on DDGs, and so we are seeing some movement of DDGs back into China. So more conversations need to be had on the Chinese front. With Brazil, last year, they put in place a protective barrier, 20% tariff on a certain volume above. I think we put 150 million gallons. They'll import 150 million gallons, and then there's a 20% tariff above that. And so what we've done is spend a great deal of time with this administration, educating them. This administration understands RFS and what it means to America's rural economy. And so we're spending a lot of time talking to the administration about, okay, well, how important is trade for us? 1.3 billion gallons last year, it's pretty important. It's also important for us in terms of the growth opportunity. Undersecretary Ted McKinney at USDA, he's been a wonderful partner and been very inclusive as he's gone down to Brazil to have conversations with his Brazilian counterparts. We'll have to see. A few weeks ago, Secretary of Agriculture in Brazil, Mr. Maggi, he said some comments in the news media that got us a little bit excited. And basically what's happening is Brazil put in this tariff, and now they're looking at their own fuel prices. And this is exactly what we said would happen. You do that, and you will drive up prices for your own constituents. And so that's a reality that Brazil is looking at, and we'll remain optimistic that some action can be taken to alleviate that. But we've got a lot of momentum, but we've got some headwinds too on the global side.
I appreciate that. So we've got a lot of advocates in the room today. And one thing that I think with all of your expertise up here on the stage that I'm interested in having you share is, as your organizations lobby to protect the RFS on Capitol Hill and elsewhere and in the regulatory front, what are some of the key messaging points that resonate, and what are some of the points that remain challenging to get across to policymakers on Capitol Hill and at EPA, for instance?
Well, I'll start by saying, I said this in my remarks, and I mean it. Your voices matter. Your voices make a difference. And Doug was talking about we have tremendous champions. I mean, look at Iowa. Senator Grassley, Senator Ernst, Governor Reynolds, and our representatives. And so you are their constituents. They care more about you than anybody else. And so when you go into their office and you say, this is really important to me, they will listen. Just as important, when they do something to help us, say thank you. It's really good for them to hear, you went to bat for me. I know that was tough. You had to have some tough political conversations, but thank you. We appreciate it. It makes a difference. And you do that, and they are that much more energized to go to bat for us the next time around. So I'll kind of say that as a blanket statement. I think a lot of the conversation for 2018 is going to be about RINs. What are RINs? I'm honestly still trying to figure it out. But I can tell you that we care about RINs because it is a way to encourage more blending. It's the mechanism to encourage more blending as part of the RFS. And there's a handful of people complaining about RINs, and it gets complicated. At the end of the day, the way to address RINs is to blend more biofuel. You give us RVP, you will blend more E15, and the price of RINs will go down at supply and demand. So I think that notion is going to be talked about a lot in Washington. We're spending a lot of time to kind of educate people. How does the RIN marketplace work? And what does that mean in terms of having a RIN as an incentive to blend more biofuel? And at the end of the day, I would say, however, that a lot of the conversations about RINs, it's not really about RINs. If that were the ready action to take is RVP. It's a win-win. RVP will blend more biofuel, and it will bring down the price of RINs. So if the conversation were about RINs, we'd be done. It's really about market share. That's what the whole conversation is about, market share. And I said this before, we are growing and we're succeeding, so we have to expect some tough times and some tough pressures because it's competitive out there.
Some of the other challenges that I've seen go back to fundamentals, and you don't know what you don't know until you find out you don't know it. And I didn't know how many people that influence our world don't know the difference between biodiesel and ethanol, compression and combustion engines. They don't understand that if you're a soybean farmer, you're a corn farmer, and vice versa. That there are reasons why you rotate crops to protect the health of your soil that's so fertile around here and does so well. So back to the fundamentals of who we are, why we're together, what we're doing. There's constant turnover in the administration and Congress and the staff. Devin Mogler used to be a key champion for us. Now he's one of us. So we have some re-education to do there. Kurt Kovarik was one of our champions. Now he's with me. And so we have to re-educate some folks. But it's constant. It's never ending. We cannot be complacent on the fundamental education about biofuels, agriculture, and our place in the rural economy.
In keeping with the education theme, in terms of if I think about what resonates the most in my Hill meetings, it's educating Hill staff and key Hill staff about the importance of the entire biofuels industry, from conventional, biodiesel, cellulosic, and advanced. A lot of questions come up, particularly with newer members or coastal members that don't necessarily have the same constituencies as the Midwest group does. Why should we support corn? Why should corn still be a part of the RFS? Or why should the advanced still be a part of the RFS? Is cellulosic even a thing? Is it even successful? So it's all about education. It's educating the staff about how it's a cohesive policy that works together. All the parts work together. For instance, for Edeniq and for the corn fiber cellulosic explosion that we've seen in the past year or so, that wouldn't have happened without the innovation coming from the conventional pool and the support of the RFS policy for traditional ethanol and things like that. So, it is all about education. It's about talking about how the industry, yes, there's different parts, but we all work together, and it's important that the entire RFS policy remains supported as is, because it is working. To go back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, it's been an extraordinarily successful policy, and it's because, it's been carried out as it was intended, which was to drive those markets and and drive investment in greater production and use of all 4 types of biofuels.
Thank you.
Great. No, I agree with a lot of what's already been said, so I don't want to just pile on. But no, I think that where Emily's point on, is what is some of these critiques, what are they really about? I think that looking at it from the market share perspective through that lens puts a little bit of a different take on it, and I think trying to understand really what some of the motivations of folks on the other side may be that has a role to play. I'd say corn farmers, and you can look at the current market situation in corn, the supply and demand is illustrated pretty well there. The supply has gone up and the price has come down. You could apply that same example to RVP as a solution in the RIN market. The amount of blending goes up and those values are going to come down. It makes sense. I think one message from NCGA, from corn growers, that we've really tried, be more cognizant when we're meeting with members of Congress and their staffs, is really to make sure that we're helping people to understand, the changes in production agriculture, especially when we're talking to members who don't necessarily have a rural district or have a lot of agriculture in their district, and we need to have these members of Congress understand more about production agriculture, about the increased productivity. It's not because we're using tons of more land that we're able to produce these additional crops and produce these record amounts of biofuels with those, so I think there are certainly some folks who kind of still look at biofuels production and the RFS as if it was 10 years ago and not today. And I think we want to continue to make sure that people understand, the way that agriculture looks today, the different sustainability efforts that farmers have undertaken, soil health, those types of things, and really how does that come into play on the big picture. And I think that helps us all kind of bring back that coalition that got us the RFS in the first place, and make sure that we're keeping all of those pieces together.
Grant, I will add, we are all in this together. And in December, 90 organizations, including those represented here on stage and many of you in the audience, throughout the entire biofuels industry, sent a letter to the president outlining some actions that can be taken to address some of the concerns that are bandied about right now in the Washington press. And my understanding is that letter is a bit unprecedented. You have farmers, corn growers, biodiesel, ethanol, first generation, second generation, equipment manufacturers, all of us who have a stake in this are united. And in the conversations ahead, people are going to be looking for daylight and to drive a wedge between corn growers and ethanol, between corn ethanol and cellulosic. And what's really nice to see and what's going to be important to maintain is that we continue to present a united front, and in doing so, it's a formidable voice.
That's great. Well, we've got 30 seconds to go, so last thing before we leave, get out your crystal balls. Any big predictions for 2018 that this audience isn't going to hear anywhere else? Got to be real quick, though.
Well, I don't know if you may hear it somewhere else. We've got so much momentum. I mean, you look at the demand drivers here at the U.S. and abroad. We've got a lot of momentum for us just in terms of the marketplace. And when people have access to our product, they want more of it. We're seeing that here. We're seeing that abroad. So I'm very bullish about where we can go with this marketplace.
Great.
It's easy to focus on the challenges, and we absolutely have to, but I think there's opportunities out there, and we will continue to work on the opportunities as well.
Excellent.
And I'm going to be bullish on the cellulosic RVOs. I believe that Administrator Pruitt will use forward-looking methodology in setting the 2019 RVOs for cellulosic.
Fantastic. Doug?
Okay, Congress has an epiphany. We're all together. They see that we are making America great right now, and they'll embrace us, and we'll get everything we want in Congress.
Yeah,
It's going to pass it all.
fantastic. And
Heard
Monty,
it here first.
Monty told me not to make any predictions, but I will say record ethanol and biodiesel production in 2018. So let's give a huge round of applause to this panel. Emily, Sarah, Doug, Kathy, thank you very much.